Awesome. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Ariana Hones. I am the Southeast organizer with Wisconsin Conservation Voters, and I will let our guest introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me, Ariana. My name is Tom Stolp. I'm the executive director of the Ozaukee Washington Land Trust based in West Bend, Wisconsin. And we work to protect land in the two counties immediately north of the city of Milwaukee. And I'm very happy to be here.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Tom. So the first question I always like to ask people is, what was your first experience with community activism or environmental activism?
Yeah. My first cause that I was involved with for conservation was, fittingly enough, with Wisconsin Conservation Voters. Back when it was the Wisconsin League of Conservation Voters, I was hired as the first Western Wisconsin organizer and worked out of my hometown of Eau Claire. And the first issue that I ever worked on was the restoration of an independent DNR secretary for Wisconsin. So I remember getting my clipboards and setting off my first weekend away. It was the Kickapoo Country Fair in Lafarge, Wisconsin, in southwest Wisconsin. And it was just wonderful. Such a good issue. So many people of all political stripes cared so much about that unique history we had in Wisconsin, managing our natural resources without direct political sway. So having a DNR secretary that was appointed by the Natural Resources Board, that Citizen Advisory Board, was so novel, going back to the founding of Wisconsin's modern conservation movement, influenced by Aldo Leopold. I went out to the Kickapoo Country Fair and postcarded and chatted with a lot of great people, and a lot of great people who ultimately became longtime volunteers and members and supporters of Wisconsin Conservation Voters, and great friends of mine. So.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. So I'm wondering, can you talk to me a little bit about your job as executive director with the Ozaukee Washington Land Trust, and just like what's the work that y'all are doing, your mission, but also for folks that maybe don't know, what's a land trust?
Yeah, great question. So I chose this backdrop behind me not only to, this is a backdrop you can see because my hands are kind of floating every once in a while. This is actually one of our nature preserves. This is the Donjas Bay Gorge, located in the city of Mequon along the shores of Lake Michigan, one of my favorite preserves in our portfolio. So I can show you a little bit more of what we do, but I'll also tell you that Ozaukee Washington Land Trust was founded in 1992 in Mequon by a group of volunteers who looked around the community and saw that it was changing, and in some ways that they didn't like, and really wanted to preserve the rural character of the community. And so they started off with their first project was to protect the Highland Woods, an 80-acre forest, intact forest, in the city of Mequon that was slated for development. They were ultimately successful in conserving the Highland Woods. First protected a property in the city of Port Washington called the Salt Creek Nature Preserve. There was a group up there that had worked hard, pooled funding as a little neighborhood group to protect this really pristine 20 acres along the Salt Creek. And they needed a group to manage it. So they said, well, there's this. It was then the Ozaukee Land Trust. The Ozaukee Land Trust could maybe take this. So Salt Creek became our first nature preserve, followed soon thereafter by the Highland Woods. We've done this as an organization more than 30 times to create nature preserves, some really special places. The Donjas Bay Gorge was once a former estate. So you see this unique pavilion behind me was once the family's pool house. And it's a beautiful structure, great place for a picnic with lookouts over Lake Michigan. The Land Trust was able to come together utilizing support from a couple great programs that Wisconsin Conservation Voters watchers will of course be familiar with, like the Wisconsin DNR's Knowles Nelson Stewardship Program was used to protect this property, as well as support from Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District Green Seams Program, and then very substantial local philanthropy from our community, because people understand, especially in times like right now, where one of the only things we can do that feels somewhat normal is getting out into nature. People in Ozaukee, Washington counties, in Milwaukee County understand how beautiful our area is, and how our natural resources really improve our quality of life. So that is the guiding mission of the land trust, is conserving those natural places. We don't only protect nature preserves, we also work with private landowners to conserve their properties using conservation easements. So we don't actually uh, buy the property or manage it. The private landowner retains their ownership, but they donate to the land trust the right to develop the property. So,
Mm.
classic example, one of our most recent conservation easements, the Deeringer family in northern Ozaukee County wanted to conserve their dairy farm operation, never see it develop. It was a now sixth generation dairy operation. And so they donated to the land trust a 250-acre open space conservation easement, which says that this land will never be turned into a strip mall or be developed upon. And so the land trust, every year we go out and we monitor that conservation easement, as well as the more than 55 conservation easements we hold across Ozaukee and Washington counties, to make sure that there is no development. Not so much an issue when you're dealing with the first generation of people who actually have donated the conservation easement, but there'll of course be subsequent owners, and we're there to make sure they don't forget that a long time ago a landowner made a gift to our community to conserve these important habitat areas and natural resources. And so our great staff is out there not only monitoring those private lands, but every day is working to maintain our more than 2,400 acres of free and open to the public land that we have across our 32 preserves. So yeah, 2,400 acres of land completely free and open to the public, all managed with a small team. We have 8 full-time staff, and they work really hard to keep these places special.
Yeah, oh, that's so wonderful. So I'm wondering, I was, looking a little bit on your website, and also you discussed just the importance of preservation of land in rural communities, and just what that does to rural spaces, but also to kind of keeping, rural culture alive and well. But I'm wondering, can you give some more examples of like what that looks like now? So like, what is this doing, keeping this land preserved? What does that do for the rural spaces that y'all are working in, and for the people that are there and living there?
Yeah, great question. I think right now it feels so timely that we are maintaining these properties free and open to the public. We've seen a huge uptick in the last 2 months in terms of usership of our properties. And really, fortunately, we haven't seen an increase in any of the nuisance behaviors that caused some of the state parks to close recently. And fortunately, they're now reopened. But the response from the community has just been phenomenal. People reaching out to us and saying, I have been a longtime fan of this one preserve because it's in my community, but with everything going on, I took the time to go out and explore this new preserve. And people saying, geez, I never knew that these places existed at all in our community, but because of the global pandemic, I'm getting outside more with my family, and we're discovering these things. We're going fishing for the first times. And so, yeah, our preserves are there for people to enjoy all of those outdoor traditions that make living in Wisconsin so special: hunting, fishing, hiking, and birding. So that's been really fun to see. The other important feature of our work is conserving farmland. And so that's where
Mm.
we oftentimes work with conservation easements to protect rural lands. And I think now more than ever, knowing the importance of sustaining our local food systems and conserving those productive agricultural lands is really important as we have global concern about food insecurity. And in the Milwaukee Metro, we've had long-standing concerns about food insecurity, which caused Ozaukee Washington Land Trust more than 2 years ago to embark on a special campaign where we actually bought a farm in partnership with the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District, a couple of great philanthropists, as well as our members. We actually bought a farm and utilized a program of the U.S. Department of Agricultural's Natural Resources Conservation Service program to purchase the development rights on this farm. And we took a very expensive piece of property very near the city of Milwaukee, and we protected that property forever using that partnership. And what's really unique about this project is what we eventually will be doing is not only restoring the land in the near term while it's under the land trust ownership, but we want to pass on the good philanthropy of this community and actually sell the property to an underserved farm family. And so a
Mm,
lot of families farming right now are struggling, but for some families, the idea of home ownership, or rather farm ownership, has been insurmountable. And so we're trying to remove one of the big barriers, which is cost, by actually buying the development rights of the property, and thereby more than halving the cost of the property so that it can remain productive agricultural land and can bring all that wealth and food security to not just an individual family, bringing wealth to an individual family, bringing food security to our community by having that farmland so close to the city of Milwaukee. So we're
yeah.
doing more of that, and yeah, that's something that we're really excited, a community need that we can respond to right now.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So, of course, because Conservation Voters does so much policy work statewide, I always like to ask too how, different environmentalists, how their issues relate to policy work at the state level. So, what's the current kind of state of policy around land trust or the preservation of land in Wisconsin? Like, is it always land trusts that are the ones preserving it, or how does that happen? And how does land, make sure that we get to enjoy it for years and years and years to come?
Yeah, great question. At the state level, one of the most important programs, which I already touched upon, is the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Program, which our organization has utilized dozens of times to conserve some of these special places. And we really rely on the great work of organizations like Wisconsin Conservation Voters and Gathering Waters to advocate for the continuation of these important nonpartisan, um, I should say broadly bipartisan programs. And so that is really the linchpin conservation program that we um, depend on very heavily. Um, I think increasingly with policies, it's a great question. I referenced briefly the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District. We have a great partnership through their Green Seams program to actually conserve wetlands in the Milwaukee
Mm,
River watershed. And so the Milwaukee River watershed goes all the way up to Sheboygan, Fond du Lac counties, and through much of Ozaukee and Washington. So we're conserving those lands upstreams that are made up of wetlands, hydric soils, because they really act as nature's sponge and filtration device. And our goal is to keep as much of that rain water in place when it falls in the headwaters of the Milwaukee River watershed so that it doesn't come downstream and cause flooding or cause more water that needs to be managed through engineered solutions, through water treatment facilities. And it's been a very productive program. We've conserved more than 1,000 acres in partnership
mm,
with Green Seams, and it's a tremendously successful, innovative green infrastructure program that has been the model nationally for sewage districts, water utilities. We're really proud to be one of the beneficiaries and main partners of the sewerage district in their Green Seams program. So those are two recent innovative policy areas. Yeah,
yeah.
that
So,
we've benefited from.
yeah. So, in terms of what, folks can do in their own communities when it comes to wildlife, habitat, and water quality, preservation and that kind of thing, how can people be getting involved at the local level, but then, of course, as it builds up into the state level as well?
Yeah, well, Wisconsin is unique in that we have, I think the number is over 40 very active, professional, vibrant land trusts across the state of Wisconsin. And so if you're not in Southeast Wisconsin while you're tuning in, if you're in another corner of the state, you can go to gatheringwaters.org and check out their Find a Land Trust tool and find a land trust in your area that will probably have some great places for you to explore these days. But also some great ways for you to get involved. So if someone is a landowner who's interested in conserving their properties, land trusts have information on different tools that we can utilize to conserve properties. If you're someone who's just looking to get more involved, of course, becoming a member and donating and supporting those organizations is a great way of doing that. Raising your voice through things like Conservation Lobby Day to advocate for Wisconsin DNR's Knowles Nelson Stewardship Program is going to be crucial. in the next year and a half, as that program needs to be reauthorized, and we hope continue to be funded at a sustainable level. Um, Getting involved locally, we'd love to have more people joining us very soon to volunteer on our nature preserves. For the time being, because of social distancing, we've really constrained our activities on the preserves just to essential functions done by our professional staff. That doesn't mean you can't go out with gloves and a garbage bag and pick up any debris that might have washed down the river or come in over the winter. Our preserves are generally pretty tidy, but they're in suburban areas, and wind blows garbage around in the country too. So it's something that we can all do to help out. Our volunteer days, normally under normal circumstances, we see people doing a lot of great activities: tree plantings, prairie restorations, lots of invasive species removal. And so there's great ways for you to get involved with the Ozaukee Washington Land Trust or a land trust right around the corner.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. So my final question is, what would it look like for the environment in Ozaukee and Washington counties, but also just in Wisconsin in general, to be thriving? And take that, as you will. Dream big. What could we do, to really make sure that our environments are thriving and really reflecting a healthy community?
I think a thriving conservation project, or I can't exactly remember how you stated, but to thrive for conservation, as far as from a land trust perspective, what that would look like to me is that we'd have vast contiguous tracts of land available for wildlife as the climate crisis is currently upon us. Um, the worst impacts of climate change will be felt in the near future, and certainly among wildlife. So our goal is to maintain large expanses of contiguous corridors for wildlife to continue, not just wildlife, but plant communities as well, to adapt to those changes. So we're trying to lay a framework of open, protected, permanently protected places for those plants and wildlife, insects, to adapt to a changing climate. So that's one version. I think having open and free access to places, even though the land trust privately owns the land, it's central to our mission to make places free and available to the public. That's, I think, a mainstay of a good conservation program, because when you give people that opportunity to experience nature, to enjoy it as a child, especially, it creates such a positive impression on people that they would truly fall in love with the outdoors. And when they fall in love with the outdoors, they want to take care of it and make for that thriving conservation future. And so that's why we work so hard to create these special places that are exciting to discover and explore, why we work so hard to steward them every day with our professional staff and with our volunteers. And we think we are making that thriving conservation future possible.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you.